The rain hammered against the windows of Rosie's cafe, creating streaks that blurred the view of the bustling military base beyond. Captain Saracen sat alone at a corner table, her civilian clothes carefully chosen to blend in. The simple blue sweater and jeans made her look like any other woman in her 30s, perhaps a teacher or nurse visiting the base. No one would guess that she commanded over 10,000 soldiers across 3 continents. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into patterns that reminded her of satellite images from her latest mission briefing. The cafe buzzed with conversations from young soldiers, their voices bright with youth and certainty. Sarah remembered when she had that same confidence, back when the world seemed divided into clear categories of right and wrong. "Ma'am, are you finished with this chair?" A young soldier approached her table, his uniform crisp and his face earnest. Behind him stood 3 other soldiers, all looking around for seating in the crowded cafe. "Of course, go ahead," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. She noted his rank insignia, a private first class, probably just out of basic training. "Thank you so much," he said, lifting the chair. "It's crazy busy in here today. I guess everyone had the same idea about getting real coffee instead of the mess hall stuff." Sarah smiled. "The mess hall coffee isn't that bad." The young soldier laughed. "You must have stronger taste buds than me, ma'am. I'm Private Williams, by the way. I don't think I've seen you around the base before." "I'm just visiting," Sarah said simply. She had learned long ago that the less she explained about her presence anywhere, the better. Her security detail was scattered throughout the cafe, dressed as civilians, watching everything while appearing to read newspapers or chat casually. Private Williams hesitated for a moment. "Are you here to see family? I know a lot of the guys have relatives visit." "Something like that," Sarah replied, taking another sip of her coffee. In truth, she was here for an unscheduled inspection of the base's readiness protocols. As the youngest general in the Army's history, she often found that advance notice of her visits led to artificial preparations that masked real problems. The cafe door chimed as more soldiers entered, shaking rain from their jackets. Sarah recognized the type immediately: combat veterans from their posture and the way their eyes automatically swept the room upon entry. One of them, a sergeant with hard eyes and multiple deployment patches, scanned the crowded space with obvious frustration. "There's nowhere to sit," he muttered to his companion. "I told you we should have gone to the PX food court." His friend, a corporal with a fresh haircut, shrugged. "Come on, Sarge. It's not that bad. Look, there's some space over there." Sarah watched them navigate through the tight spaces between tables. The sergeant moved with an aggressive energy that made other patrons step aside. She had seen this before. Soldiers returning from deployment sometimes struggled with civilian environments, finding them too chaotic or unpredictable after months in controlled military zones. The sergeant's gaze fell on Sarah's table, which had more space around it due to its corner location. He approached with purposeful strides, his expression determined. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Would you mind if we shared this space? The place is packed, and we just need somewhere to sit for a few minutes." Sarah looked up at him, noting the stress lines around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands that suggested too much caffeine and not enough sleep. "I don't mind sharing," she said. "But I should mention that I'm expecting someone to join me." The sergeant's jaw tightened slightly. "When are they supposed to arrive?" "Soon," Sarah said, which was true. Her aide would be arriving within the hour to brief her on the afternoon schedule. "Define soon," the sergeant pressed. "Because we've been standing for 10 minutes, and, frankly, I don't think your friend is coming." Sarah felt her eyebrows raise slightly. In her years of service, she had encountered many different personality types, but direct confrontation from subordinates was rare in her experience. "I understand your frustration," she said calmly, "but the table is large enough for all of us." The sergeant's companion, the corporal, tugged at his sleeve. "Sarge, maybe we should just wait. Someone else will leave soon." "No," the sergeant said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm tired of people taking up more space than they need. Lady, you're sitting at a table for 4 people, drinking 1 cup of coffee, and pretending you're waiting for someone who obviously isn't coming. The conversations around them began to quiet as other patrons noticed the developing confrontation. Sarah remained seated, her hands calm around her coffee cup. She had defused far more dangerous situations than this, including a tense standoff with foreign military officials just 3 weeks prior. "Sergeant," she said quietly, reading his name tape, "Sergeant Rodriguez, I appreciate that you've had a long day. Why don't you and your friend take these 2 chairs, and we can all share the table like reasonable adults?" Sergeant Rodriguez's face flushed. "Don't patronize me, lady. You think because you're pretty and polite that you can just take up space while soldiers who've been serving their country can't even sit down?" The corporal looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Sarge, seriously, let's just find somewhere else." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "I'm sick of entitled civilians who think they can waltz onto military installations and act like they own the place." He leaned forward, placing his hands on Sarah's table. "You want to know what I think? I think you're some officer's wife who thinks her husband's rank gives her special privileges." Sarah's security detail had noticed the escalation. From the corner of her eye, she could see Agent Martinez shifting in his seat, ready to intervene. She gave him a subtle shake of her head. This was exactly the kind of situation she needed to understand how her soldiers behaved when they thought no one important was watching. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, her voice remaining steady, "I think you might be making assumptions about me that aren't accurate." "Am I?" he challenged. "Then, prove it. Show me your dependent ID card. Show me what gives you the right to take up a table meant for 4 people while soldiers stand around waiting." The entire café had gone quiet now. Even the baristas behind the counter had stopped working to watch the confrontation. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how this civilian woman would respond to aggressive questioning from a military sergeant. She considered her options. She could reveal her identity and end this immediately. But that would teach her nothing about the underlying issues that were clearly affecting Sergeant Rodriguez and, potentially, other returning soldiers. Instead, she decided to continue observing. "I don't think I need to prove anything to you, Sergeant," she said calmly. "But I am willing to share the table if you'd like to sit down and order something." Rodriguez's face darkened further. "You know what I think? I think you're not even supposed to be here. I think you snuck onto the space and you're trying to blend in, and now you're too scared to show proper identification because you know you'll get in trouble." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah realized that the sergeant's suspicion, while misguided, wasn't entirely unreasonable. Her civilian clothes and reluctance to provide detailed information about her presence could seem suspicious to a security-conscious soldier. "That's a serious accusation," she said quietly. "Then, prove me wrong," Rodriguez demanded. "Show me your ID, or I'll call the MPs and let them sort this out." The corporal grabbed his friend's arm. "Sarge, you can't just demand to see someone's ID. That's not how this works." "The hell I can't," Rodriguez snapped, shaking off the corporal's grip. "Security is everyone's responsibility, and I'm not going to stand here while some unknown civilian refuses to cooperate with basic identification procedures." Sarah realized the situation was spiraling beyond what she had intended to observe. Her presence was supposed to be discreet, and involving military police would compromise her entire inspection schedule. But Rodriguez's growing agitation suggested deeper issues that needed addressing. "Sergeant," she said, standing slowly, "I think we need to take a step back and don't move," Rodriguez said sharply, misinterpreting her gesture as an attempt to leave. "You're not going anywhere until we figure out who you are and what you're doing here." The authority in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being given orders by someone who technically worked for her. Around them, other soldiers had begun to take notice, some standing as if preparing to assist Rodriguez if needed. "This is getting out of hand," the corporal whispered urgently. Rodriguez ignored him. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to present your identification and explain your presence on this military installation." Sarah looked at him carefully, noting the genuine concern behind his aggressive demeanor. This wasn't a power-hungry soldier trying to intimidate a civilian, this was someone who truly believed he was protecting base security. The realization made her approach the situation differently. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, "what if I told you that my presence here is authorized at the highest levels, but that I can't provide details without compromising ongoing operations?" Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment. "Then, I'd say you sound like someone who watches too many spy movies." A few soldiers near them chuckled, breaking some of the tension. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Real authorized personnel have real identification," he continued. "They don't speak in riddles and refuse to answer direct questions. So either you're lying, or you're testing us for some reason." The statement was so close to the truth that Sarah had to suppress a smile. Rodriguez might be handling the situation poorly, but his instincts weren't wrong. "And if I were testing you," she said carefully, "how do you think you'd be performing?" The question seemed to give Rodriguez pause. His aggressive posture shifted slightly as he considered the possibility that this encounter might be something other than what it appeared. "If this were a test," he said slowly, "then I'd say I'm doing my job by questioning suspicious individuals and protecting base security." "Even if your methods are creating a scene and making other personnel uncomfortable?" Rodriguez glanced around at the watching faces, seeming to realize for the first time how much attention their confrontation had drawn. "Sometimes security requires uncomfortable conversations." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's true. But effective security also requires good judgment about when and how to engage potential threats." The café fell silent again as Rodriguez processed her words. The corporal beside him looked increasingly nervous, clearly sensing that something was happening beyond his understanding. "Who are you?" Rodriguez asked, his voice quieter now but no less intense. Before Sarah could respond, the café door opened with a sharp chime. Agent Martinez entered, followed by two other individuals in business attire who moved with unmistakable military precision despite their civilian clothes. Rodriguez's eyes widened as he recognized the coordination and purpose in their movements. These were clearly not random café patrons. "Ma'am," Agent Martinez said, approaching the table with respectful formality, "your 1 o'clock appointment has been moved to 13:30. The colonel sends his apologies for the delay." The careful phrasing and military time reference made Rodriguez take a step back. His face had gone pale as the implications of the situation began to dawn on him. Sarah looked at Rodriguez with what might have been sympathy. "Sergeant, I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." The café remained utterly silent as she gathered her jacket and prepared to leave. Rodriguez stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized he might have made a terrible mistake. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "I was just doing your job," Sarah finished for him. "And we'll talk about how well you did it." As they prepared to leave the café, Sarah could see the other soldiers watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to growing alarm. The young Private Williams who had asked about the chair earlier looked particularly shocked. Rodriguez's corporal friend grabbed his arm again. "Sarge," he whispered urgently, I know what we need to do," Rodriguez said quietly, his face now showing clear recognition that he had seriously misjudged the situation. Sarah paused at the table, looking back at both soldiers. "Corporal Thompson, Sergeant Rodriguez, I expect to see both of you in conference room B at 1400 hours. Please ensure you're in proper uniform." The formal military language and specific meeting time left no doubt about her authority. Rodriguez's face had gone from pale to ashen as the full reality of his situation became clear. As they walked toward the café exit, Sarah could hear whispers beginning to spread among the other patrons. Word would travel quickly through the base now, and her cover was thoroughly blown. But the interaction had revealed important information about how her soldiers were handling stress and security concerns. Agent Martinez held the door open for her, his expression professionally neutral despite the irregularity of the situation. "Ma'am, should we adjust the afternoon schedule to accommodate the additional meeting?" "Yes," Sarah said, stepping out into the still falling rain. "And please have someone compile Sergeant Rodriguez's service record and recent deployment history. I want to understand what we're dealing with before this afternoon." Behind them, through the café windows, she could see Rodriguez standing motionless at her former table while other soldiers approached him with obvious questions and concerns. The confrontation in the cafe was over, but Sarah knew the real conversation was just beginning. In a few hours, Sergeant Rodriguez would learn exactly who he had challenged, and both of them would have to figure out what came next. Conference room B felt smaller than usual as Sergeant Rodriguez stood at attention beside Corporal Thompson, both soldiers in their dress uniforms despite the short notice. Rodriguez's hands were steady now, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw and the way his eyes focused straight ahead rather than meeting her gaze. She had spent the past 2 hours reviewing his service record, and the picture it painted was complex. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart from an IED attack that had killed 2 of his squad members. Excellent performance reviews until 6 months ago, when his efficiency ratings began to slip and his supervisors noted increasing friction with both superiors and subordinates. At ease, Sarah said, settling into her chair at the head of the conference table. Agent Martinez stood by the door, while her aide, Major Lisa Park, sat with a tablet ready to take notes. Both soldiers relaxed slightly, but Rodriguez's discomfort was obvious. Thompson kept glancing nervously between his sergeant and the woman who had just revealed herself to be far more than a random cafe patron. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Sarah began, "before we discuss what happened in the cafe, I want you to know that I've reviewed your service record. Your performance in theater has been exemplary, and your soldiers respect you. That's why I'm particularly interested in understanding today's incident." Rodriguez swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I have no excuse for my behavior. I failed to show proper respect to a superior officer, and I created a disturbance in a public setting. I take full responsibility for my actions." Sarah studied his face. The words were correct, but they felt rehearsed, like something he had been practicing during the 2 hours since leaving the cafe. "That's not what I asked, Sergeant. I want to understand what you were thinking and feeling during our encounter. Your actions today didn't happen in a vacuum." Thompson shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain whether he was supposed to speak or remain silent during what was obviously going to be a difficult conversation for his friend. Rodriguez hesitated. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm not sure my thoughts and feelings are relevant to the situation." "I'm making them relevant," Sarah said firmly. "Sergeant, you've served multiple deployments with distinction. You've led soldiers under combat conditions and earned their trust. But today you confronted a woman in a cafe with an aggression that suggests something deeper is going on." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Sarah waited, knowing that patience would serve her better than pressure in this moment. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. "Ma'am, I've been back stateside for 4 months now. And every day feels like I'm walking through a world that doesn't make sense anymore." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Explain that." Rodriguez's professional composure cracked slightly. "Over there, everything has purpose. Every rule exists for a reason. Every protocol serves a function. People follow orders because lives depend on it. But here..." He paused, struggling with the words. "Here people waste food while complaining about the quality. They take up space they don't need while others wait. They make excuses instead of solutions. And, when you try to apply military standards to civilian situations, you get told you're being too intense or unreasonable." Sarah nodded slowly. She had heard variations of this speech from dozens of returning soldiers over the years. The transition from combat zones to civilian environments was one of the military's most persistent challenges. "So when you saw me in the cafe," she said, "taking up what you perceived as more space than necessary, it felt like another example of civilian inefficiency." "Yes, ma'am. And, when you wouldn't provide clear answers about your purpose or identification, it triggered every security protocol I've learned. In Afghanistan, unknown civilians in military areas are potential threats until proven otherwise." Thompson nodded slightly, suggesting he had heard similar thoughts from his sergeant before. Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's honesty, but she wasn't finished exploring the situation. "Sergeant, what did you think when I remained calm during your questioning?" Rodriguez frowned, considering the question. "At first, I thought you were trying to manipulate the situation. Most civilians get angry or defensive when challenged by military personnel. Your composure seemed calculated. And that made you more suspicious. Yes, ma'am. People who stay calm under pressure are either very innocent or very dangerous. And innocent people usually have identification they're willing to show. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by Rodriguez's tactical thinking, even as she recognized the problems it was creating in his daily life. "Corporal Thompson," she said, turning to the younger soldier, "what was your perspective during the cafe incident?" Thompson straightened. "Ma'am, I could see that Sergeant Rodriguez was escalating the situation beyond what was necessary. I tried to suggest alternatives, but he was focused on what he perceived as a security concern." "Did you think I was a security threat?" Thompson hesitated. "Honestly, ma'am, you seemed like someone who was used to authority. Your body language, the way you spoke, the fact that you didn't get flustered when challenged, it suggested military or law enforcement background." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "But you didn't support your sergeant's approach?" "No, ma'am. I thought he was handling it wrong. Even if you were a security concern, creating a public confrontation wasn't the appropriate response. There are proper channels for reporting suspicious activity." Rodriguez's jaw tightened at his subordinate's criticism, but he didn't contradict the assessment. Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Gentlemen, I want to share something with both of you. What happened today wasn't entirely accidental." Both soldiers looked at her with surprise and growing concern. "I conduct unscheduled visits to military installations specifically to observe how our personnel behave when they think no one important is watching. The cafe incident wasn't planned, but it became an opportunity to understand something crucial about soldier readiness and adaptation." Rodriguez's face had gone pale again. "Ma'am, are you saying this was some kind of test?" "I'm saying that your reaction revealed important information about the challenges facing soldiers transitioning back from deployment. Sergeant Rodriguez, your instincts about security and your concern for military standards aren't wrong. But your application of those instincts in civilian contexts needs refinement." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where soldiers moved with purpose between buildings. "The military teaches you to be suspicious, aggressive, and decisive because those traits keep people alive in combat zones. But those same traits can become liabilities in environments where collaboration and flexibility are more important than dominance and control." Rodriguez remained silent, but she could see him processing the information. "Corporal Thompson, your ability to recognize appropriate responses while maintaining loyalty to your sergeant shows good judgment. But your reluctance to directly challenge inappropriate behavior from a superior needs work." Thompson nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah returned to her seat. "Now, let me tell you what I saw today that concerned me. Sergeant Rodriguez, you demonstrated excellent tactical awareness and genuine commitment to security. But you also showed signs of stress, aggression, and difficulty adapting your responses to civilian contexts." She pulled out a tablet and scrolled through his recent performance reports. "Your supervisors have noted increasing friction with both superiors and subordinates over the past 6 months. Today's incident suggests those reports might be understating the problem." Rodriguez's posture sagged slightly. "Ma'am, I know I've been difficult to work with lately. Everything feels wrong since I got back. Have you spoken with anyone about transition counseling or stress management?" "No, ma'am. I didn't think it was necessary. I've been through deployments before without problems." Sarah nodded. "This deployment was different, though. You lost 2 squad members to an IED attack. You were injured yourself. And you've been back in a civilian environment that feels increasingly foreign after multiple combat tours." The reference to his lost soldiers hit Rodriguez visibly. His careful military composure cracked, and she could see genuine pain in his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't know how to exist in a world where people waste resources and complain about inconveniences while my soldiers are buried in Arlington Cemetery because they were trying to protect people who don't even appreciate the sacrifice." The raw emotion in his voice filled the conference room. Thompson looked stricken, clearly hearing details about his sergeant's deployment experiences for the first time. Sarah allowed the silence to stretch before responding. "Sergeant, the anger you're feeling is understandable and legitimate. But it's also dangerous if left unaddressed. To you, to the soldiers under your command, and to your ability to continue serving effectively." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "What do you recommend, ma'am?" "First, you're going to begin working with Captain Sarah Williams in our transition counseling program. She specializes in helping combat veterans adapt to stateside assignments." "Ma'am, is this voluntary or mandatory?" "It's mandatory, Sergeant. But it's also confidential and designed to help you maintain your military career rather than end it." Rodriguez straightened. "Will this appear in my service record?" "Participation in transition counseling doesn't appear in service records. But continued behavioral problems will. Today's incident could have resulted in disciplinary action. Instead, I'm choosing to treat it as a learning opportunity." Sarah could see relief and gratitude competing with pride and resistance in Rodriguez's expression. "Corporal Thompson, you'll be participating in leadership development training. Your ability to assess situations and think independently is valuable, but you need stronger skills for addressing inappropriate behavior from superiors." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." Sarah stood, indicating the formal portion of the meeting was ending. "Gentlemen, I want to be clear about something. What happened today doesn't reflect poorly on your character or your service to this country. It reflects the challenge of maintaining military readiness while adapting to different operational environments." Both soldiers remained at attention, but she could see them relaxing slightly. "Sergeant Rodriguez, your instinct to question unknown civilians in military areas was correct. Your method of questioning needs refinement, but your security consciousness is valuable." Rodriguez looked directly at her for the first time since entering the conference room. "Ma'am, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you remained calm during my questioning, were you deliberately testing my responses, or were you just naturally composed under pressure?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Both. I'd been in enough difficult situations to stay calm under pressure. But I was also curious to see how far you would push the confrontation and what it would reveal about your state of mind." "And what did it reveal?" "That you're a good soldier dealing with difficult transitions, and that you need better tools for managing stress and adapting your responses to different environments." Rodriguez considered this. "Ma'am, I appreciate your approach to this situation. Most officers would have ended my career today. Sergeant, ending careers doesn't solve problems. It just moves them somewhere else. I'd rather fix problems than hide them." Thompson spoke up. "Ma'am, if I may ask, how often do you conduct these unscheduled visits?" "Often enough to stay connected with what's actually happening in our units, rather than just what appears in official reports." Sarah gathered her materials, preparing to end the meeting. "Gentlemen, you'll receive detailed information about your respective programs within 48 hours. Sergeant Rodriguez, your first counseling appointment is scheduled for Thursday at 0900 hours. "Yes, ma'am." "One final thing," Sarah said, pausing at the door. "What happened today stays in this room. The incident in the café will be remembered as a misunderstanding between a soldier and a base visitor. Nothing more." Both soldiers looked surprised by the discretion she was offering. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, "why are you protecting us from the consequences of my mistake?" Sarah looked at him steadily. "Because the military succeeds when good soldiers get the help they need to continue serving effectively. Today was a symptom of a larger problem that we can address. Punishing symptoms doesn't cure diseases." She opened the door, then turned back one final time. "Sergeant, the next time you encounter someone you think might be a security concern, what will you do differently?" Rodriguez thought carefully before responding. "I'll observe first, gather more information, and use proper channels to report concerns rather than creating public confrontations." "And if direct engagement becomes necessary?" I'll start with respectful questions and professional demeanor, escalating only if the person proves genuinely uncooperative or threatening.
Sarah nodded approvingly. Excellent. That's exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that makes good soldiers into great leaders.
As she left the conference room, Sarah reflected on the unexpected education the day had provided. Rodriguez's confrontation had revealed important insights about soldier transition challenges, stress management needs, and the gap between combat zone training and stateside application. More importantly, it had given her an opportunity to help a good soldier navigate difficult circumstances rather than simply punish him for struggling with them. The cafe incident was over, but the real work of supporting Rodriguez's transition was just beginning. 3 weeks after the cafe incident, Sarah found herself reviewing progress reports in her office when Major Park knocked on her doorframe. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the stacks of files that seemed to multiply daily despite her best efforts to stay organized.
Ma'am, you have a few minutes before your next appointment. I thought you might want to see this.
Major Park handed her a tablet displaying what appeared to be incident reports and counseling session summaries.
Sarah scanned the documents, recognizing Sergeant Rodriguez's name immediately. How has he been doing with Captain Williams?
Better than expected, actually. He's been attending all his sessions, participating actively in the transition counseling program, and his supervising officers report significant improvement in his interactions with both subordinates and civilian personnel. Sarah scrolled through the detailed reports, noting specific examples of Rodriguez applying new conflict resolution techniques and demonstrating better situational awareness in non-combat environments.
There's something else, Major Park continued. He's requested permission to speak with you.
Captain Williams thinks it might be beneficial for his progress.
Sarah looked up from the tablet. What kind of conversation is he looking for?
According to Captain Williams, he wants to apologize for his behavior and discuss some insights he's gained during counseling. She thinks it would provide closure for both the incident and his transition process.
Sarah considered the request.
In her experience, forced apologies were rarely meaningful, but genuine attempts at understanding could be valuable for everyone involved.
Schedule 30 minutes with him tomorrow afternoon.
Make sure Captain Williams is available to join us if needed.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, there's been an interesting development regarding Corporal Thompson.
Sarah raised an eyebrow. Oh?
His performance in the leadership development program has been exceptional. His instructors recommend accelerating his promotion timeline and consider him for advanced training opportunities.
The news didn't surprise Sarah.
Thompson had demonstrated good judgment and independent thinking during the cafe incident, qualities that often predicted successful leadership development.
What kind of advanced training are they recommending? Officer candidate school, potentially.
His instructors think he has the intellectual capacity and leadership instincts for commissioned service. Sarah made a note on her calendar to review Thompson's complete file. One of the unexpected benefits of difficult situations was their ability to reveal potential that might otherwise remain hidden. The next afternoon, Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at her office door in a crisp dress uniform, his posture confident but respectful. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, and his general demeanor seemed more settled than during their conference room meeting.
Sergeant Rodriguez, please come in. Have a seat.
He sat across from her desk, his hands relaxed rather than clenched.
Ma'am, thank you for agreeing to meet with me.
I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Sarah leaned back in her chair.
Captain Williams says you've been making excellent progress in the transition program.
Yes, ma'am. The counseling has been more helpful than I expected. I went into it thinking it would be a waste of time, but Captain Williams has given me tools for managing stress and adapting to different environments that I didn't know I needed. Rodriguez paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing.
Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for my behavior in the cafe.
Not just the disrespect to a superior officer, but the way I handled the entire situation. I've realized that my approach was inappropriate regardless of who you turned out to be. Sarah studied his expression, looking for signs that this was a rehearsed speech rather than genuine reflection.
What she saw was sincerity mixed with embarrassment. What specifically do you think you handled poorly, Sergeant? Several things, ma'am. First, I let my frustration with civilian environments override my judgment about appropriate responses. Second, I escalated a minor inconvenience into a confrontation. Third, I ignored input from Corporal Thompson when he tried to suggest better approaches. Sarah nodded. Those are accurate assessments. What would you do differently now? Rodriguez considered the question carefully. I would start by recognizing that my emotional state was affecting my decision-making. The counseling has taught me to identify stress signals before they influence my behavior. And, in terms of the actual situation? I would have approached you politely, explained the seating situation, and accepted your offer to share the table. If I genuinely suspected a security issue, I would have observed discreetly and reported my concerns through proper channels rather than creating a public confrontation. Sarah was impressed by the thoughtfulness of his response. Too often, mandated counseling resulted in superficial compliance rather than genuine insight. Sergeant, Captain Williams mentioned that you've gained some insights during your counseling sessions. What have you learned about yourself? Rodriguez shifted slightly, clearly moving into more personal territory. Ma'am, I've learned that I was using military standards as a way to avoid dealing with my anger about losing soldiers under my command. It felt easier to be angry at civilians for wasting food or taking up space than to process grief about soldiers who died protecting people who might never know their names. The admission hung in the air between them. Sarah recognized the vulnerability it took for a combat veteran to acknowledge using anger as a shield against deeper pain. That's a significant realization, Sergeant. How has that understanding changed your approach to daily situations? I've learned to separate my grief about deployment losses from my frustration with current circumstances. They're different problems that require different solutions. And I've started channeling my need for purpose into mentoring younger soldiers rather than criticizing civilian behavior. Sarah made a note on her pad. This kind of redirection of military instincts toward constructive purposes was exactly what successful transition counseling should accomplish. Tell me about your mentoring work. Rodriguez's posture straightened with obvious pride. I've been working with 3 soldiers who just returned from their first deployments. Helping them understand the adjustment process and giving them tools for managing the transition that I wish I'd had. And how has that affected your own adjustment? It's given me a sense of purpose that doesn't depend on being in a combat zone. I can serve my country and help my fellow soldiers without needing to be angry at the world. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the transformation she was witnessing. The angry, confrontational sergeant from the café had evolved into someone who understood his triggers and had developed healthy coping mechanisms. Sergeant, I want to ask you something that might seem unrelated to our previous discussions. What do you think about the incident now that you know I was conducting an unofficial assessment of base operations? Rodriguez looked thoughtful. Honestly, ma'am, I'm grateful that it happened. If you hadn't been there to turn it into a learning opportunity, I probably would have continued escalating situations until I did something that ended my career. Do you feel manipulated by the fact that I observed your behavior without revealing my identity? No, ma'am. You saw exactly who I was in that moment, an angry soldier who wasn't handling stress well. If you had identified yourself immediately, I would have hidden those problems rather than addressing them. Sarah nodded approvingly. The ability to accept responsibility without feeling victimized was a sign of genuine maturity and growth. What are your plans moving forward, Sergeant? I'd like to continue the mentoring work and possibly develop it into a more formal program for soldiers transitioning back from deployment. Captain Williams thinks there might be opportunities to expand the counseling services based on what we've learned about my case. The suggestion intrigues Sarah. Most successful military programs grew organ.